We have with us Janine Macaulay-Lissand, who is a former student of this university, undergraduate Spanish and French program, a couple of years ago. Okay, as you say, a couple is nice. She's a member of the translation section of the United Nations headquarters in New York, and she's also a member of the outreach division that is going out there explaining to the world what the UN does when it comes to language services and how you can also play a part in it if you are interested and highly motivated, I should say. So without further ado, we will pass around and give some handouts that have some generic information, but the most important part is the presentation by Ms. Lissand.
Good afternoon, everyone. Like you said, I am a former student at UB, in French and Spanish, more than a couple of years ago. And I am a translator at the United Nations in New York. And the team of the interpreters and translators who are involved in outreach to universities. I'm here to tell you about the opportunities for language professionals. I will give you a brief outline of those possibilities, and then tell you a bit about my career path, so that you can have an idea of what kind of questions I might be able to answer for you. So, as you probably know, the UN was founded in 1945 in the aftermath of World War II, and according to the Charter of the United Nations, in Article 1, the purposes of the United Nations are to maintain international peace and security, develop friendly relations among nations, achieve international cooperation in solving international problems of an economic, social, cultural, or humanitarian character, and be a center for harmonizing the actions of nations in the attainment of these common ends. But these purposes are not just noble, they represent an ambitious and broad agenda for the international community. The UN is tasked with fulfilling these purposes in every field of human endeavor that requires effective communication between speakers. Whether it be between counterterrorism experts, I was a member of a team covering a Security Council meeting between experts of the Security Council and the French prosecutor for terrorism affairs. That was a closed meeting, so obviously the general public will not hear about it, but that is one of the functions of the UN. Whether it be between warring factions, the current crisis in Yemen, if you've heard of it, is one example of where the UN does important work. Between governments, academia, NGOs, meeting to set targets for reducing poverty or implementing the recently adopted Sustainable Development Agenda. I'm sure you've heard of those as well. And that is where the UN language staff comes in. You'll see that I included this on your handout, mainly just for interest, but I also want to show you how diverse the work of the UN is, and to show you where the language services fit in. Now these are the main bodies in blue: Refugee Council, Security Council, General Assembly, Economic and Social Council, which has various subsidiary organs as well, the International Court of Justice, and the Secretariat. There are also programs and funds which you also heard about, UNICEF, World Food Program, and specialized agencies such as UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. In the Secretariat, the headquarters are in New York. We also have offices at Geneva, Nairobi, and Vienna, and regional commissions in Beirut and Santiago. The specialized program agencies, program and funds all hire language professionals. You can apply for jobs directly with them. All you have to do is check out their website, keep abreast of when they don't have exams usually, they just request CVs. So what I am going to focus on are the staff posts that are at the United Nations Secretariat and Regional Commissions. The members of this core team of language professionals are selected exclusively through competitive examinations. We service the Security Council, the General Assembly, and the human rights bodies in Geneva. Depending on the duty station, we are either part of the conference services or the publication division, but we do not translate the UN website. in New York that is done by the Department of Public Information. Language professionals at the UN are recruited mostly as interpreters, translators, editors, verbatim reporters, copy repairers, production editors, and proofreaders, terminologists and reference assistants, and text processors. I will explain these skills in a moment. And as I said before, all language staff are located in the Department for General Assembly and Conference Management, DGACM. I once heard a delegate refer to us as DGACM. The UN loves acronyms. So first, let me remind you of the language regime of the UN. There are 6 official languages. Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian, and Spanish. We also do some German translation. There's a small German translation service, but that is funded by the German-speaking countries, their governments. And originally, there were 5 official languages. Arabic was added in 1973. Obviously, given the current international context, the need for translators with Arabic has increased 100-fold. The working languages of the UN are English and French. However, in some regional commissions, in Santiago, for instance, languages are English and Spanish, and in Beirut, English and Arabic. A delegate addressing the UN or a meeting may speak in any of the official languages. The speech is interpreted simultaneously into the other official languages, but a delegate may use a non-official language if he or she so desires. In such cases, they must provide either an interpretation or a written statement for the interpreters to use. As you know, interpreters work with spoken language. They mostly interpret speeches and proceedings at the UN meetings. Unless they're on a special mission, they only do simultaneous interpreting. Often they interpret speakers who are reading out written statements, which are supplied just before the meeting starts. It may sound easier, but it's not, because speakers try to cram as much in as they can, and often they may leave bits out, they may add bits in, ad-lib, and interpreters also have to deal with various accents. I remember when I was at UE here, Eric had brought in, who was it? Monsieur Lila? Yes. And he mentioned a Japanese speaker delivering a statement, and they were going on about blue kalawakas, and no one knew what they were talking about. And the interpreters misled the entire conference because they couldn't understand this guy's accent. Being a UN interpreter requires considerable skill. It calls for a high level of concentration and split-second accuracy. Any idea what other skills are required of a UN interpreter? Just off the top of your head. Sorry?
Word issues?
Yes, world issues. You have to assimilate a broad range of subjects and specialized terminology, because the organization is always addressing new issues, be it climate change, space. There's the 4th committee of the General Assembly deals with the peaceful uses of outer space, which is very, very specialized terminology. Moving on to the next slide. There we go. Translators, as you know, translate documents only. We translate only into our principal language, which is normally our mother tongue, or a language of higher education instruction. And usually from at least 2 other official languages. I say usually because now the French translation service and Spanish translation service only require English. That's very new. It's only been in the last year or so that they've decided to change that requirement. Being a UN translator requires more than just excellent foreign language skills. It requires good general knowledge, superior analytical skills, the ability to master new subjects quickly, and political sensitivity. Now here you can see on this picture, we use dual screens. Often one is to do research, and the other our main text that we're translating. Translators in the English service at the UN in New York also produce summary records of the meetings and proceedings of certain UN bodies. We work in teams and go into the meetings. Here you can see some of my colleagues sitting in the middle of things. That's the Economic and Social Council chamber. So we take notes directly from the speakers if it's a language that we know, and if it's a language that we do not know, we use the interpreting. Then we go back to our offices and write up the summary of the proceedings of that meeting. Now, we have an advantage because the other translation services do not produce summary records, so they're stuck in their offices all day. We get to participate and see the UN in action. We get fascinating insight into the world of multilateral diplomacy. I remember, I think it was 2 years ago, I was covering a meeting of the Fourth Committee. It's a special decolonization committee, so they deal with decolonization issues among others. And it was at the height of the Russia-Ukraine crisis. And there was a delegate who was kind of snooping around and it's like, well, may I help you, sir? He's like, yes, I want the statement there, please. Well, I can't give it to you because it hasn't been delivered yet. It's embargoed, so it's not public. Yes, but I'm from delegation. Sorry, I can't give it to you. We found out at the next meeting he was the Russian delegate. He was trying to get his hands on the Ukrainian speaker's statement. So you have to be very aware of, current affairs. It's important to note that you are not required to have any experience in précis writing before applying to the UN. It's something that you can learn on the job. However, the competitive exams do require, there is a short summary writing exercise. I'll go into the language exam in a bit. So the French and English translation exams require some summary writing. And they are only produced in Geneva for the human rights bodies. I don't know if you know them, but it's the Committee Against Torture, the Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. There are quite a few of them. At the regional commissions, particularly ECLAC in Santiago, the translators do some report writing. It's a bit different to summary records, but you use reported speech. And it's only, again, the English translators who do this. Moving on to the next slide. Verbatim reports, as I mentioned in one of the, as a language professions, they are, verbatim records are polished records of a meeting, word for word. They're only produced for the high-level bodies of the UN, the General Assembly, the Security Council. And they work from the recordings or transcriptions of the proceedings, and they translate them into English or French, the official languages. Verbatim records for the Security Council are required the next day, and for other meetings, the turnaround is quite quick, so they work under a lot of pressure. It's different to précis writing because there's no need for fact-checking or polishing. Well, you polish up the speaker's original words, whereas in summary writing, you kind of, whittle out the unnecessary bits. Editors. In the old days, editors worked on paper with red pens, scratching off and highlighting bits. Now we work on screen using the, what's it called in word again? track changes, thank you. So editors ensure that documents are accurate, coherent, consistent, appropriate for the target audience, and are ready to be translated into the other 5 languages. They edit documents submitted by member states or produced by UN bodies before publication and translation. So it's a key part of the whole document workflow. So editors at the UN need to have solid research skills, excellent writing skills, precision, attention to detail, an ability to think analytically, and sensitivity to nuance and political issues. There are also other opportunities for language staff. Copy preparers, production editors, and proofreaders. The proofreading stage of the section involves reading the set page of proofs against the original manuscript to ensure that all language versions say exactly the same thing. Reference assistants flag previously translated texts, find standard terminology, and they also assist the English translation service by using OCR software to convert PDFs into usable Word format. We have developed our own in-house computer-assisted translation tool called Iluna. I could go into a bit more detail about that later on, but we require Word documents only. It does not process PDF. So that's where the reference assistants come in very handy for us as well. Terminologists and terminology assistants. They work across all languages and occupations to agree on standardized terms and entries logged into the United Nations Global Terminology Database, which is UN term. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of it or consulted it, but it's available in all the official languages. I will show you quickly the tools in a bit. And text processors, that's the final part of the chain. When we submit a translation, the text processor, they format it, make sure everything, the masthead is there, and then they upload it to the document storage of the official document system of the UN. Let me just bring up UN term. And so I'll go back to these links a bit later on after the presentation. Okay, now this is to show you the evolution of a UN document. We get the draft from the member states or a department of the Secretariat. It's then edited by the editors. There you have an example of, editing by hand, back as it was done back in the old days. The reference text is then sent to the translators. We translate the text either using Word and just overtyping, or using Iluna, which is our computer-assisted translation tool. The text is then revised by a senior translator or reviser, and then sent to the text processors, formatted, and then it's uploaded to the official document system. So that's the life cycle of a document in the UN. So where do we work? As I said earlier, the UN language staff are located in the Department for General Assembly and Conference Management. The staff work at the main duty stations in New York, which is the headquarters, Geneva, Vienna, and Nairobi, and also at the United Nations regional commissions in Bangkok, Beirut, Addis Ababa, and Santiago. The specialized agencies, funds, and programs of the UN have their own language units that are not part of DGACM. The work varies from one duty station to another. At headquarters, the work is primarily to facilitate the deliberations of member states in advance of General Assembly or Security Council meetings. We edit draft, translate, prepare documents for the member states. And during meetings, interpretation is provided. After the meetings, we produce verbatim or summary records. In the UN at Geneva, language staff are also part of the conference services team. They facilitate the workings of the human rights mechanisms of the various treaty bodies. Reports to the various committees that are submitted by member states are translated in the official languages for the committee. And then during the meetings when member states present their reports, there are interpreters in the room, and summary records as well are produced by a team of Tracy writers. At ECLAC, there are only staff posts for translators, and Spanish is a requirement, obviously. Their main work is in the publications division, not in conference services, and they edit and translate the flagship economic documents, either on economic and developmental issues, tourism, the advancement of women in Central America. Is quite varied. I have worked at Geneva, and before moving to New York, I worked in Geneva. And the type of work is very different. As I said, it's basically human rights. And, you deal with human rights violations, reports of enforced disappearances in Chile and Latin America. And it's very heavy work. You don't want to take it home with you. You get home and you're depressed. You think, the world is really screwed up. So, what are we looking for at the UN? As you can see, there are different types of career opportunities for language professionals. And we have an ever-increasing workload, and because of an upcoming wave of retirements, we are looking to recruit some 150 language professionals in the next 5 or so years. So, we are looking for individuals who are highly motivated, who have excellent technical and language skills. I mentioned briefly our translation tool, computer-assisted translation tool. Experience in CAT tools is a plus, but it's not necessary because we provide our own training. I am part of the team that trains new staff and old staff in using eLuna. It's very easy to, if you've worked with CAT tools before, I don't know if they do that. No. Okay. Well, basically, it speeds up your translation. Willingness to work in different duty stations. Mobility is one of the key requirements of UN translators. In fact, all UN staff are required to be mobile. And the Secretary General has asked that because people like to attend the cushy headquarters jobs and don't want to work in the field. But because we're language professionals, we can't be sent everywhere. We can only go to the duty stations that require those languages based on our language combinations. Keen interest in current affairs. As I said, I knew about the Russia-Crimea issue, so I was aware that the guy might have been a spy. So, and then commitment to the key values of the UN, which are integrity, respect for diversity, and professionalism. Next slide. How do you join the UN language staff? I think that's what you're all interested in. So the language interpreters, editors, translators, verbatim reporters, and copy preparers are recruited solely through formal recruitment tests, known as language competitive examinations. They're held approximately every 2 to 3 years, so you need to check the website, which is careers.un.org, very frequently. There are addresses on your handout, so you can just have a look at it when you've got time. If I can, maybe after the presentation, I'll show you how to get to the various exam instructions. Now, the LCEs are for entry-level positions. They do not require much experience, but they are very difficult and require a lot of skill. To apply, you first have to have your eligibility confirmed. That means you should check that you meet all the requirements listed in the examination notice. There's usually a notice, it says 2 years experience, 3 years experience, master's degree. Can't be older than 56, excellent command of English, excellent knowledge of two other languages, in our case, for translation into English. You then create a profile on Inspira, which is the tool that we use throughout the UN. It can be a very tedious process, as Eric knows. You have to fill out a very, very long form online because the UN does not accept CVs. So the personal profile is the replacement for the CV. You then submit the job application, and you may be asked to write a cover letter. And once the application is received, staff at Human Resources and the English Translation Service evaluate the application to see whether you are suited and eligible to sit the exam. If you are, you are then called to sit a written exam, which can be at a designated test center, or as has been done very recently with the Spanish translation done remotely. So the written exam for English translators and précis writers consists of, you might want to note this down, this is very important, translation into English of a general text in one of the official languages. This paper is eliminatory. If you fail this, they don't even look at the other papers. Then you translate another text, general text, from another official language. So if you did French for the first one, you do Spanish for the second. That lasts for an hour and a half. So it's a whole day thing. The third exercise is a summary. You prepare a summary of a text in one of the official languages. It could be French, Spanish. If you've got Arabic, you can decide to do an Arabic statement. It's usually a statement that has been delivered at a meeting. And you prepare a summary in English. And the fourth test, exercise, is a specialized text. So it could be economic, legal, scientific, and you have a choice of whichever language you want. If you have a third official language, you may decide, hey, I know German. Well, no, German isn't official. I know Chinese, and I want to do a translation from Chinese just to show off your skill. Great, you can do that as well. When you're successful at the written exam, you are then convoked to an oral exam. This is a competency-based interview. It's just to see whether you have the skills, the temperament, the personality required of a UN translator. And during the competency-based interview, you may also have another skill test, which is usually a sight translation. So you're given 20 minutes to prepare a text, and then you're just asked to read your translation of that text to the panel. Now the interview is not, it's another step in the process, but it's usually not eliminatory, unless you say, I don't really want to work for the UN, I just decided to do the test to see if I could pass. Then obviously they're not going to hire you, and that has happened in the past. So, so then between the results, the oral examination and the final placement on the roster, you have a wait of usually a couple of months when everything is, the gradings are compiled. Then you're placed on the roster, and as posts become available, when people retire or move to another duty station, you're contacted by Human Resources and asked if you are interested in taking up a post at the UN. And I know very few people who have said no. Actually, I know someone who said no. So the UN only recruits the very best. Very few people pass the LCE on the first try. I should know I didn't pass it on the first try. The pass rate on first time applicants is usually between 10 and 15%. But you can take the exam as often as you wish. I know someone who's just passed the exam and he's taken it 6 times, I think. So, Perseverance is the key. The other language positions are not filled through LC's terminology referencing, but they advertise directly on the careers portal, and applicants may be asked to sit a test if it's, I guess, for the text processors, a speed typing test or something, but it's not an official competitive exam. And now we come to internships. For those who have not yet graduated or have only recently graduated, there are a very small number of internships in the language services each year. In ETS, we have about 2 or 3 each year during summer. I say summer because I work in New York. I'm a Trinidadian. It's wet season, dry season for me. In Vienna and Geneva, I think they also have about 2 or 3 interns every year. In interpreting, there are no interns. There is an opportunity for students from universities with which the UN has memorandums of understanding. The top students in interpreting in those universities are sometimes offered dummy booth practice for a few weeks in the year. So internships are advertised like job openings, like LCEs, on the careers website. Again, that's careers.un.org. And they last between 2 and 6 months, no longer. They are unpaid. New York is very expensive, so you have to be very committed and probably have an auntie or uncle who can put you up for the 2 months. I don't know if any of you heard the stories about the UN intern who was sleeping in a tent in Geneva. Yeah. But language, interns are not paid because it's a touchy subject. And I think there's an article in The Guardian a few days ago as well. Okay, so during the course of an internship in the English Translation Service in New York, interns translate, subject to revision, a variety of documents, reports, submissions from member states, and communications addressed to the Secretary General. Sometimes someone decides from, Yemen, I want to write to the Secretary General to ask him to, and we've had this happen, I need 2 goats because, the goats in my village all died. And they were bombed and, could you please send me 2 goats? I kid you not. This was someone from our service translated this from Arabic. They also have the opportunity to attend high-level meetings and try their hand at producing summary records. Right. Because resources and space is, are limited, the UN is exploring the possibility of offering virtual or remote internships. This is going to be piloted with the Spanish Translation Service in New York and the University in Latin America. The idea is to have students translate documents under the guidance of a professor at the university, and they will receive feedback from professionals in New York. As I said, it's a pilot. It's just been introduced in 2016. So whether or not this pilot is expanded will depend on the results of the pilot and availability of staff to dedicate time to giving feedback, and the priorities of the organization with regard to recruitment, language combinations and the like. Now, before I go to the next slide, internships allow you to get a foot in the door. And as I said before, they are unpaid, so you have to be really committed to doing that. But the best way to get into the UN is to sit the LTE and pass it. You get the right experience, hone your skills, and if if you can get government experience or just working with international organizations, NGOs, just to get an awareness of the subject matter that the UN deals with. You know, improve your language skills and sit the exam. You may or may not pass it the first time around like I did. But, you know, from my experience, after I left UE, I went to France. I worked as an assistant de langue for 2 years, where I improved my French considerably. Then I pursued a master's at ESIT, École supérieure d'interprète et de traducteur. I worked as a freelance translator for a number of years. I was invited to sit a freelance test for UNESCO, and then I was sent translations. I did them, sent them back in, you know, meeting deadlines, that's important. When these organizations see the quality of your work, sometimes they offer you in-house contracts. So I was able to do quite a few in-house contracts at UNESCO in Paris, and test the waters of working in an international organization. And then I sat the exam first in 2005, didn't pass. It was 2007. And then I sat it again in 2009 and continued, you know, accumulating contracts everywhere I could find them. I was offered a contract at UNOG after I passed the exam and went there and worked for 4 months. And then was eventually offered a permanent post in New York. And then I moved to New York in 2012. So, as I said, perseverance is the key. If you don't pass the first time, try again, you know, you'll get there eventually. And as a product of UE, I can attest to the to the excellent language skills. I work with people who've gone to Cambridge and Oxford, and we can hold our own with the best of them out there. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. As I said, UN Language Careers, that is the main portal and source of information for internships, and it is available in all 6 languages. It has information about interpreters. You can see profiles of interpreters, translators. There are tips on passing the exam. This is what it looks like. So if you go to recruitment, you will see information on the exams and internships as well. Outreach, here you'll find information on the memorandums of understanding with universities. And I'm sure you could look into, getting a memorandum of understanding. But that is for Dr. Roberts to do. We have a presence on social media, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. You can check out these websites. We try to update them regularly. We have 2 social media focal points. That's UN Jargon for you. Coordinators, I guess everyone else would call them. So they are responsible for tweeting and putting up information about when exams will be held, internships, any openings, job openings, and the like. And if you would like more information that is not available on these sites, you may email the outreach coordinator at Toco, not Toco in Trinidad, Toco-dgacm@united.org. Alright, so now let's hope that we can see many more graduates of UE joining the UN family. I am one of the very few, and I hope that we can see many, many more of you in the years to come.
In New York?
In New York, I think I'm the only one.
But there are other treaties.
There are at New York, yes, but not in. Yeah, Heather Jarvis is in New York. She's in editing. So, and just to let you know that the UN will be sending you through UE a link for a questionnaire to give you some feedback, and I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have, if any.